Welcome, dear readers, to a journey through time. Prepare to meet Charlotte Ashworth, a resilient soul who will discover that even in the darkest moments, dignity and knowledge can be our brightest light. In an era where a woman depended entirely on her reputation, we will accompany her fall, her silent exile, and her extraordinary redemption. Where are you watching us from? Let us know in the comments the city from which you're joining us. This is a story about second chances, about how true love is born from mutual admiration and respect, and how justice, though delayed, always finds its way. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. You are essential to keeping alive the art of telling stories that touch the soul. Year: 1828. Location: Ashworth Manor, Ravenshollow County, England. The icy December wind swept across the fields of Ravenshollow, like ancient tears that refused to dry. Charlotte Ashworth, at 26 years old, organized her few belongings on the rustic table of the stables, where she had built her solitary existence for the past 6 years. The golden light emanating from the windows of the main house danced cruelly against the darkness where she dwelt. The cheerful voices of Lady Constance's Christmas ball guests reached her ears like echoes of a life she had once known, a life before the fall, before exile, before becoming the forgotten shadow of Ashworth Manor. With fingers that trembled more from the weight of memories than from the cold, Charlotte caressed the worn leather cover of a book of poems she had been restoring for weeks. Each damaged page she saved seemed a reflection of her own soul, wounded but not destroyed, abandoned but not lost. The echo of laughter from the ball made her throat tighten with a nostalgia she had learned to carry in silence. 6 years ago, she too had been among those voices, had also laughed under the crystal chandeliers, had also believed the world reserved kindness for her. Now, only books understood her. Only in the yellowed pages did she find company that did not judge her, that did not whisper about her fall in corridors perfumed with contempt. But not even Charlotte imagined that this would be the last night of her exile. The storm that struck Ravenshollow that dawn seemed to carry omens. Charlotte awoke to the sound of horses and agitated voices echoing through the main courtyard. From the small window of her refuge, she glimpsed a black carriage cutting through the mist like an apparition. Henry Blackwood descended from the vehicle with the posture of one who had faced storms far worse than this one. At 38 years old, he carried on his broad shoulders the weight of battles won and irreparable losses. His grey eyes surveyed the property with the precision of a military strategist evaluating unknown terrain. Lady Constance Ashworth emerged from the main entrance wrapped in embroidered silks, but her elegant gestures could not disguise the tension that contracted her lips. The man before her was not a visitor, he was the new owner of her entire life. "Lord Blackwood," she murmured in a calculatedly humble bow, "we were not expecting you in the midst of such a storm." "Storms do not alter military schedules, Lady Constance," Henry replied, removing his leather gloves with precise movements. "I came to take possession of what is mine by right." Charlotte watched from the shadows, fascinated by the natural authority that emanated from the stranger. There was something in his posture that awakened a curiosity in her that had been dormant for years. Who was this man who arrived like winter itself, cold, inevitable, but carrying promises of renewal? The destiny of Ashworth Manor had just changed forever, but Charlotte did not yet know that hers was also about to be rewritten. The next morning dawned crystalline, with snow transforming the property into a blank canvas where each step left its mark. Henry decided to explore alone the domains that now belonged to him, mounted on his black horse that answered to the name Wellington. It was the golden brightness filtered through the cracked stained glass of the old chapel that first caught his attention. The small temple, abandoned for decades, guarded within its interior, a treasure that few knew existed. Henry dismounted, intrigued, and pushed the heavy oak door. What he found took his breath away unexpectedly. Charlotte was kneeling among piles of ancient manuscripts, with a magnifying glass in her right hand and a delicate brush in her left. She was restoring with surgical precision the golden illuminations of a medieval psalter, her hands moving with the reverence of one who touched sacred relics. "Forgive me," she whispered, rising in a graceful movement despite her surprise. "I didn't know that you—" "Don't apologize," Henry interrupted, genuinely impressed. "What you're doing here is extraordinary." Charlotte hesitated, her brown eyes seeking to detect mockery or disdain in the masculine face. She found neither. Only an intense curiosity that no one had shown for her work in years. They are illuminated manuscripts from the 14th century, she explained, her voice gaining confidence. The library of this chapel contains treasures that rival the collections of Oxford. I'm trying to save them before humidity destroys them completely. Henry approached, noting the delicacy with which she handled the precious parchments. Those hands were not made for brutal work in the stables. A silent question began to form in Henry's mind. Who really was this mysterious woman who inhabited the forgotten corners of his property? The afternoon found Henry in the main library of the manor house, confronting Lady Constance with questions she preferred not to answer. The fireplace fire crackled between them, like a silent witness to truths that had remained buried for years. "The young woman from the stables," Henry began, his words measured like sharpened blades. "She is not a simple servant, is she?" Constance adjusted the lace shawl over her shoulders, a nervous gesture that did not escape the trained eyes of the former military man. "Charlotte was my niece," she finally admitted, as if the words burned her throat. "But 6 years ago she behaved unacceptably. She seduced a respectable married man and tried to blackmail him. I had no choice but to protect our family reputation." Henry observed the expressions that alternated on Constance's face. There was more than simple disapproval there. There was guilt. "A respectable married man," he repeated slowly. "What man would that be?" "Lord Edmund Pemberton," she whispered, as if the name were a dangerous invocation. Henry knew that name. He also knew his dubious reputation in London military circles. The pieces of a puzzle began to fit together in his mind, forming a very different picture from the one painted by Constance. "Tomorrow," he said, rising with determination, "Charlotte will be transferred to the main house. I want her to organize and catalogue the entire library of the property. It is a task worthy of her talents." Constance paled, perceiving that the past she had tried to bury was about to resurface with renewed force. The room on the second floor of the main house seemed like a palace compared to the frozen stables where Charlotte had spent 6 winters. The 4-poster bed of mahogany, the dark blue velvet curtains, and the jacaranda desk by the window overlooking the gardens, all of it seemed like a dream from which she feared to wake. For the first time in years, Charlotte had a complete night of restorative sleep. She awoke with the first rays of sun kissing her face through the clean window panes, feeling something she had forgotten existed: hope. Henry found her in the main library that morning, already immersed in her new work. She had begun to catalogue the volumes, creating a classification system that demonstrated deep knowledge of literature, history, and philosophy. "How did you learn so much about ancient manuscripts?" he asked her, genuinely curious, watching her examine an incunabulum with the expertise of a Cambridge scholar. Charlotte hesitated before responding, her fingers caressing the leather binding with reverence. "My father was an antiquarian," she said softly. "Before he died, he taught me that books are the memory of the world. In the stables, they were my only real company. I learned to restore them because I couldn't bear to see them die." Henry observed the melancholy delicacy in her gestures, the way her eyes lit up when speaking of knowledge. There was a natural nobility in Charlotte that no circumstance had managed to destroy. "From now on," he said, "you will have all the necessary resources for your work. This library deserves to be properly preserved." The shy smile that illuminated Charlotte's face at that moment was the first in 6 years, and Henry felt something awaken in his chest that he had judged dead forever. 3 weeks later, while restoring a 15th century missal, Charlotte made a discovery that would change the destiny of the property. Hidden in the double binding of the book, she found a carefully preserved parchment, a document that she little knew contained the power to alter fortunes. Her hands trembled as she unrolled the manuscript with infinite care. It was a donation of lands to the church, dated 1698, with authentic episcopal seals. The document established that a significant part of the Ravens Hollow lands officially belonged to the diocese, including the chapel and its surroundings. Charlotte immediately understood the implications. Henry had been negotiating with the diocese about the chapel's rights, but without this document, he would lose not only the beautiful medieval construction, but also the most fertile lands of the property. She found him in the study that afternoon, bent over maps and legal contracts, his brow furrowed in concentration. The fireplace fire projected dancing shadows on his masculine profile, accentuating the scar that discreetly cut across his left hand, a permanent reminder of Waterloo. "Henry," she said, and it was the first time she pronounced his name. "You need to see this." He raised his eyes, noting the urgency in her voice, and when Charlotte extended the ancient parchment, their fingers touched for an instant that seemed eternal. "Where did you find this?" he whispered, instantly understanding the value of the document. "Hidden in a binding. Someone wanted to preserve it secretly," she responded. "With this parchment, the rights over the chapel are unquestionably yours." Henry looked at Charlotte with an admiration that went far beyond professional gratitude, perceiving that she had just saved not only his lands, but also his future. The days that followed established a precious routine that both came to secretly await. Henry visited the library every afternoon, initially to discuss Charlotte's historical discoveries, but gradually to enjoy the company of a mind that rivaled the best he had known at Cambridge. Charlotte revealed herself fluent in Latin, Greek, and French, capable of translating medieval texts with the same ease with which she discussed Napoleonic military strategies or Enlightenment philosophy. Henry found himself intellectually stimulated in a way he had not experienced since university times. "Your education was remarkable," he commented on a golden May afternoon, watching her effortlessly translate a Latin treatise. "Few men from Oxford would demonstrate such mastery." "My father believed that knowledge had no gender," Charlotte replied, a gentle smile curving her lips. "He said that an educated mind was the only treasure that no one could steal." Henry studied her delicate profile outlined against the window light. There was a melancholy wisdom in Charlotte that spoke of sufferings transformed into strength, of solitude converted into depth. "And he was right," Henry said quietly. "You have proven it every day of these 6 years." In that moment when their eyes met for some prolonged seconds, both felt a connection that transcended intellectual admiration. It was the recognition of two souls who had known pain and found in solitude not bitterness, but refinement. What had begun as mutual respect was blossoming into something much deeper and dangerous for two hearts that had sworn never to love again. The June afternoon arrived laden with gentle rain and unplanned confessions. Charlotte was restoring the personal diary of an 18th century lady when she encountered a passage that made her stop. The woman had written about a lost love, about how true affection was recognized only in retrospect, when it was already too late. Henry entered the library at that moment and noticed the thoughtful expression that shadowed Charlotte's face. He approached, intrigued by the silence that had extended between them. "What disturbs you?" he asked her softly. Charlotte hesitated, then closed the diary carefully. "This lady writes about someone she truly loved only once in her life," she said, her voice laden with a vulnerability she rarely allowed to show. "It made me think if I ever really knew love." Henry sat in the nearby armchair, studying the expressions that alternated on Charlotte's delicate face. "And did you?" he inquired, his own voice hoarser than he had intended. "I thought I did," she admitted. "At 20, I believed in the promises of a man who told me beautiful words while planning a convenient marriage with another. I learned that we can be used as amusement before appropriate love." Henry felt a cold rage rise through his throat. He knew too well men like Pemberton. "And you?" she dared to ask. "Have you truly loved?" The silence that followed was filled only by the gentle drumming of rain against the window panes. Henry contemplated his intertwined hands, and Charlotte noticed how he unconsciously touched the Waterloo scar. "Once," he said finally. "Lydia. I lost her along with our son 6 years ago. I swore I would never again allow my heart to become vulnerable." In that moment of raw honesty, both understood that they were dangerously close to breaking oaths made to themselves. Lady Constance organized the summer ball with a specific intention: to present Henry to local society and subtly remind him what Charlotte's appropriate place was in his house. The main salon was decorated with white and golden roses, the finest china was polished, and guests from throughout the county arrived in elegant carriages. Henry surprised everyone by insisting that Charlotte attend not as an employee, but as a guest. He had a petrol blue silk dress brought for her that enhanced her brown eyes and contrasted beautifully with her fair skin. When Charlotte descended the main staircase that night, Henry felt the world stop for an instant. She was radiant, carrying herself with the natural dignity that no circumstance had managed to break. Constance approached Henry during the opening waltz, her smile sharp as a razor. "I hope you're not letting yourself be deceived by appearances, Lord Blackwood," she murmured venomously. "Some people have the habit of taking advantage of others' kindness." Charlotte was always ambitious beyond her station. Henry stopped dancing abruptly, his grey eyes transforming into ice. "Lady Constance," he said, his voice cutting enough to be heard by nearby couples, "I must express my deepest gratitude, if not for your wisdom, in recognizing Charlotte's true value. I would never have discovered the most precious jewel of this property. The silence that followed was deafening. Constance paled, understanding that she had made an irreparable mistake. That night, all of Ravenshollow society understood that Charlotte Ashworth had found not only protection, but also a defender, willing to face the world for her. Henry was not a man to accept partial versions of the truth. In the days that followed the ball, he wrote letters to London, activating a network of military and legal contacts he had cultivated over the years. He wanted to know the complete story of Lord Edmund Pemberton. The answers arrived 3 weeks later, bringing revelations that confirmed his darkest suspicions. Pemberton had accumulated enormous gambling debts. His reputation in respectable circles was ruined and, most importantly, the investigators found other victims. 3 young governesses, all from respectable families but without resources, all seduced with promises of marriage, all subsequently accused of inappropriate behavior when wives discovered the affairs. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Henry summoned Charlotte to his study on a cloudy August afternoon. She entered with the cautious posture of one who had learned to expect disappointments, but he saw cautious hope in her eyes. "I investigated Pemberton's history," he said without preamble. "You were not his first victim, Charlotte, nor were you the only one." He extended the investigator's letters to her, watching how her hands trembled slightly as she read the accounts. Silent tears slid down her cheeks, not of renewed pain, but of deep and liberating relief. "For 6 years," she whispered, "I questioned whether there was something fundamentally wrong with me, whether I had really seduced a respectable married man." Henry stood, approaching her with the delicacy of one approaching something infinitely precious. "You were an innocent young woman deceived by an experienced predator," he said firmly, "and it's time for the world to know the truth." Charlotte looked at Henry through her tears, perceiving that he was not only offering vindication, he was offering justice. The assembly convened by Henry in the main hall of Ashworth Manor brought together magistrates, parsons, and the elite of local society on a golden September morning. He had orchestrated this moment with the strategic precision of his military campaigns. Pemberton was forced to appear under threat of criminal prosecution. He arrived visibly disturbed, his once impeccable appearance now marked by the weight of scandals that had finally caught up with him. Henry presided over the assembly with unquestionable authority, methodically presenting the gathered evidence, documented confessions, testimonies from other victims, financial records that proved Pemberton's predatory motivations. "Lord Pemberton," Henry said, his voice echoing through the silent hall, "you systematically used vulnerable young women to satisfy your appetites, then destroyed them to protect your reputation. This was not moral weakness, it was calculated predation." Pemberton tried to deny, but the evidence was overwhelming. One by one, the pieces of the puzzle were exposed. How he chose victims without resources to defend themselves, how he used his social position to destroy those who dared to resist. Lady Constance, forced to confront her complicity, finally admitted to having ignored obvious signs because preserving family reputation was more important than protecting an orphaned niece. When the truth was completely revealed, Charlotte stood in the center of the hall. Her voice, clear and dignified, cut through the silence like a crystal bell. "For 6 years," she said, "I lived with the shame of crimes I did not commit. Today, the truth frees me not only from calumny, but also from the bitterness that could have destroyed my soul." The hall erupted in murmurs of admiration and repentance, and Charlotte Ashworth was publicly restored to the position of wronged victim and woman of irreproachable character. The restored chapel shone like a golden jewel in the light of the October sunset. Charlotte had personally supervised every detail of the renovation, transforming the abandoned space into a sanctuary of medieval beauty that rivaled London's cathedrals. Henry found her there that afternoon, kneeling before the altar where she had organized the restored manuscripts in glass display cases. The light filtered through the newly repaired stained glass, created a golden halo around her silhouette, as if she were a medieval saint from a precious illumination. "Charlotte," he said softly, and his voice carried a vulnerability she had never heard before. She rose, turning to face him. Henry approached slowly, as if approaching a dream that might vanish at the slightest sudden movement. "I want to offer you something," he said, extending a carefully prepared document. "The permanent administration of this property's entire library, including the creation of a study center that will bear your name." Charlotte took the document with trembling hands, but her eyes remained fixed on Henry's face. "Why?" she whispered. Is it gratitude for what I discovered about the lands? Henry smiled, a smile that completely transformed his habitually serious expression. It's not gratitude, Charlotte. It's love. The silence that followed was filled only by the distant echo of Ave Marias that seemed to whisper through the ancient stones. For 6 years, he continued, I lived as a dead man. You brought back not only my capacity to feel hope, but also my capacity to believe in human goodness. Charlotte felt warm tears flow down her cheeks, not tears of pain, but of a joy so pure it seemed golden, like the light that enveloped them. Henry, she began, but he interrupted her gently. Marry me, he said simply, not out of convenience or gratitude, but because you are the other half of my soul that I didn't know I was searching for. When Charlotte whispered her yes through tears of happiness, the very stones of the chapel seemed to sigh in approval. Charlotte and Henry's wedding was celebrated in the chapel she had restored in an intimate ceremony that marked not only the union of two souls, but also the triumph of truth over calumny, of love over bitterness. Charlotte wore the cream silk dress that had belonged to Henry's mother, modified with laces she herself had restored from ancient manuscripts. Henry, in his military dress uniform, carried himself with the dignity of a man who had finally found peace. The local parson, the same one who years before had turned his back on Charlotte based on rumors, now blessed her with tears of repentance in his eyes. The small but select congregation included only those who had supported Charlotte during her vindication. Lady Constance was not present. She had departed for Bath the previous week, unable to face the weight of her own guilt and the transformation of power that her cruelty had inadvertently caused. When Henry kissed Charlotte before the altar, sealing their vows, the setting sun sent golden rays through the restored stained glass, bathing the couple in a light that seemed like divine blessing. That night, at her first dinner as Lady Blackwood, Charlotte sat at the head of the main hall table, the same hall where she had been humiliated 6 years before, but there was no bitter triumph in her eyes, only the serenity of one who had found not only justice, but also purpose. Henry raised the crystal goblet, proposing a toast that echoed through the centuries of history that the ancient walls had witnessed. To my wife, he said, his voice laden with genuine admiration, who proved that true value does not reside in what the world thinks of us, but in what we build when no one is watching. In that moment, under the approving gazes of ancestral portraits that had witnessed so many stories of love and loss, Charlotte finally understood that her redemption was complete. The golden November morning found Charlotte in her new role as Lady Blackwood, administrator of the county's most prestigious private library. She walked through the restored gardens beside Henry, discussing plans for the Historical Studies Centre that would transform Ashworth Manor into an academic reference. The centre was already receiving correspondence from scholars at Cambridge and Oxford, interested in the medieval manuscripts that Charlotte had saved and catalogued. Her expertise was now recognized in academic circles she had never dreamed of reaching. Sometimes I still wake up thinking all this is a dream, she confessed, stopping before the rosebush that had bloomed exuberantly after Henry ordered the renovation of the garden's irrigation system. Henry took her hands in his, noting how they had transformed, still delicate but now cared for, without the marks of brutal labor they had carried for 6 years. It's not a dream, he said softly. It's justice. It's what should always have been your life. Charlotte looked toward the majestic manor house she now called home, toward the chapel where they had married, toward the gardens where they planned to create an amphitheater for academic lectures. All of it was real, built upon the solid foundation of mutual respect and genuine love. Do you know what I learned in these months, she said, smiling with a serenity that radiated like golden light. That true redemption doesn't come only from public vindication. It comes from discovering that we are capable of transforming our pain into wisdom, our solitude into compassion. Henry delicately kissed her forehead, a gesture that had become a daily ritual between them. And you taught me, he replied, that true love doesn't diminish our strength, it multiplies it. That autumn afternoon, while golden leaves danced in the wind like celestial confetti, Charlotte and Henry walked hand in hand through the property they had transformed from a scene of exile into a sanctuary of knowledge and love. The woman who had once been banished to the stables now received letters from foreign universities. The man who had sworn never to love again had discovered that a healed heart is stronger than a protected heart. And in the golden fields of Raven's Hollow, where the wind carried promises of future instead of tears of the past, the story of Charlotte and Henry became legend, proof that preserved dignity, cultivated knowledge, and true love always find their way back to the light.